Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to my OCD Life. This first season's really exciting because I'm going to have really all sorts of kinds of things. It's going to be a little unfocused. It should be my ADD life, but there's just so many things that I want to get into when it comes to, bringing into the podcast space a philosophy that's positive and touches on some different aspects of life. And so I look forward to having a warm conversation with you guys and with all of my guests. My first guest is David Carden. He's been an activist, a pastor, really overall just fantastic human being. Me and David have an amazing relationship where even though we have big differences in the way that we see things, it all comes back down to a similar way of approaching our problems. That even though in this podcast episode we're not going to get into our big differences, I thought he was a kindred spirit to introduce this podcast to you guys. And so he's going to guide us through a little interview with yours truly, with myself, and I hope you guys like it. Bear with me with my equipment and stuff. I'm kind of new to this. Hopefully, through this first season, I'll have things dialed in, and going forward, things will be smoother and smoother. But hope you guys enjoy this episode. Thanks for watching. David, man, how you doing?
I'm good, brother. How are you doing?
Doing great, man. Doing fantastic. It's
You
for
look it.
yeah. Go ahead, man. We're gonna say.
I said you look it. You look fantastic.
I appreciate it, man. I'm the CrossFit is it's keeping me somewhat lean. I still got some pounds to lose, but it's Rome wasn't conquered in a day, but one reason why I wanted to have you on, and I guess for the audience, I want people to know Dave's a dear friend of mine. He's probably my closest confidant in a lot of my exploring of psychology and really my own philosophy of life that I really want to begin to just talk about in this podcast. I feel like I have a very interesting story to tell with the OCD and how that really drove me to really iron out some questions about myself and to really seek resolution within myself. And it's funny when you really are able to address the problems within yourself, you realize that other people have problems too, and you discover, man, we all got our battles, and especially today, and from the off the heels of COVID from last year and everything. I think mental health is a huge element that we're focusing on, because I think we really we all experienced a shakeup and a demand on ourselves psychologically, and we're still working through that. And so but there wasn't a greater person to kind of introduce, I think, this a lot of my or to help me introduce a lot of my ideas and what I want to do with this podcast, and my dear friend David. So David's a brilliant mind. He really challenges me in lots of ways, and he's glad to have you. And man, I guess we'll just get rolling, man. Anything that I said right there that you will not comment on before we get rolling?
Yeah, I think the idea is today is to be able to kind of give people a picture into kind of some of what churns in your mind and what you're thinking in terms of your goals and hoping to accomplish with this I guess how you're going to be using your creativity in this podcasting world. And so I think it kind of makes sense to understand kind of what is your primary driving inspiration? What's the name of your podcast? What's kind of inspiring you to jump into this world?
Yeah, man. The podcast, My OCD Life. It's a podcast that I want to describe as a multi-dimensional kind of experiment, really. It's a multi-dimensional exploration of human joy and the capacity for us to explore ourselves and learn how to do that. I feel like we come into this world in such a unique way that's unique to ourselves. And slowly throughout life, we get pulled away from our genuine experience of life because we try to meet so many expectations that are placed on us, especially in the West, in busy American life. And we are almost left behind. Our own idea of ourselves, our own genuine humanity, our ability to connect within ourselves. And so consequently, we begin to disconnect from the world outside us because we aren't connected within. There's a sort of phenomenon of projection that I think we tend to have. And as long as we're not ironing out ourselves and kind of looking within and really doing the work that is necessary for us to be whole and to stay whole, to stay authentically connected to our own joy, the authentic perspective that we bring to the world, I think we walk in confusion. I remember when I was in college, often the teacher would say, any questions, anybody? And I can remember, I was probably one of the few people that actually asked questions. And then after class, everybody was like, man, I'm glad you asked that question. It's kind of like, dude, why are people so afraid to acknowledge that they have a void in themselves? And it's not wrong. It's not bad. I guess it's bad, but it's not their fault. It's just part of human nature, and this acknowledgement of our own deficit of knowledge, I guess, our own the necessity for us to kind of plug deeper into ourselves and to acknowledge when we don't know something, having a sort of vulnerability and humanity. I think it all comes back to our own comfort within ourselves, because we have comfort in our own process of joy, in our I think in our process of just being a whole person. That stability, I think, is what makes us able to handle instability. The certain doubts we have don't just demoralize us. They actually, there are things that exercise our certainty. And I really feel like there is so without getting deeper into that, the podcast is a exploration into the struggle of my life. We all have our different struggles, our own unique struggles, our own areas that we have to learn for ourselves how to engage. And we can only, I think, do it by observing and listening to other people and how they have faced their own problems. I wouldn't say that's the only way, but it's one of the best ways of really starting. There's so much, like I said, doubt, I think, in so many areas of knowledge, because I feel like there's an underlying doubt in how you navigate your inner world. How do you define normal? That's kind of like one of the most fundamental problems that we have coming into this world. Too often we get, into our teens, we realize our whole lives there was something abnormal that we just accepted because we didn't know any better. I feel like we have a lot of areas like that, and it's a huge problem of what does it look like to be a truthful representation of who I am? And what that's such a loaded question. All these questions are loaded, but I feel like they are the questions that are essentially the catalyst for a lot of the problems that I see in the world. Because I feel like if a lot of people had self-awareness, a lot of people would be able to have that security to not be dependent on ideologies or to be dependent on anything else other than their own genuine understanding, their own genuine humanity, to connect with humanity. To me, anything other than that is to deaden yourself, is to deaden your own ability to truly accept yourself and to accept what is the nature of reality. And it's a very deep, I'm going into deep water, but I want to blend all these different areas of psychology, spirituality, art, religion, philosophy. All these different things are different windows into understanding what I believe we can call truth. And so a lot of this is going to be my opinion, and that's at the same time I can only tell you that what works in my own life. This is a controversial statement, but there are such things as more true opinions. Like when you debate someone, there is a value judgment. There's wiggle room where it's hard to be certain about a lot of things, but you can know that some things are more true than other things. If I say, this is my favorite red jacket, okay, and someone else says, man, I love that blue jacket. It's kind of, well, that's the wrong color. That's not correct. Now, so it was that's his opinion. And when it comes down to it, what our observations, the way we see the world, the way we see ourselves, our perceptions are filled with certain understanding of what is true that sometimes it's hard to kind of exactly debunk or explain to people, because at some point we have to rely on self-evident truths. And so the best thing I think we can do is first integrate truth and who we are as people, and so people can feel that you're being honest, and there isn't tension in your opinions there, because to me, truth resolves who you are, resolves you, and our ability to suspend ourselves, I think, into a deeper understanding of who we are and what's true to us, I think brings us closer to that big capital T truth that I think we all can have insight into. But it's hard. It's very difficult, because I think that's why we all have such colliding opinions. We all have different sense of value judgment, but there's times where we have overlap, and it just feels right. But navigating that's tricky. And so for me, this podcast is meant to really delve into the experiential nature of life and reality, and how we're able to cultivate our own sense of joy and growing. And the only way to communicate that is I think through multiple different means, through storytelling, through having conversations with people, through music, through getting into the religious and spiritual questions, philosophical questions. There's all these different windows that I want to be able to use this podcast to explore the mystery of life, the mystery of consciousness, the mystery of just this thing called life.
Yeah, you gave a bit of a quite a bit of a range of where things will probably go and possibly go.
Yeah.
So you said the title of this is My OCD Life, right?
Yes.
What, for those, I guess some may not recognize those things, what is OCD?
Okay, yeah. I kind of assume people know what that is. I should probably get into that. OCD stands for obsessive compulsive disorder. I can remember probably as back trying to find the earliest that I began to experience obsessive compulsive tendencies. I think it was preteens for sure. It's probably at least 10, maybe, and I remember consciously realizing that at my parents' house, when I would leave, when I walk out of the bathroom, whenever my hand would be on the doorknob and I'd go walk out, I had to let go of it and it not hit my hand. Just for some reason, it was like, compulsions of just trying to order things a certain way. There's this weird projection that we feel a disorder in ourselves. And yet I think obsessive compulsive disorder is essentially a projection of that inner tension onto the outer world. And it's so sneaky. It's hard to realize when it ends and when it begins, or, when it starts, because we come in this world relatively without, I guess, neuroticism, I guess. I mean, that may be debatable, but I think as far as disorders go, I think I'm still kind of exploring the topic of this. And so, by the way, the podcast, there's going to be a lot of open-ended elements to this. I don't claim to have an exhaustive knowledge of these things, but I have enough to really, I've talked with enough people about this throughout the years that I know I have something to offer. And through identifying my own struggles and identifying things within me, of approaching the areas of my heart that have caused me to to project, and to kind of realize there is this place of dissonance that I have to confront, and I have to learn how to resolve within me. And when I resolve that, the compulsiveness, relatively ceases. OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder, I think has some positive variations. Like, I think there's parts of your life where you want to create order. I mean, it's okay to be able to see order, feel disorder, and then use that as a catalyst for order. I think what happens though with OCD is that there is underlying beliefs of that disorder in relation to your identity. And so this podcast is going to get into, I want to talk about mental health generally, my perspective is from someone who's experienced obsessive compulsive disorder. So that's kind of the struggle of my life that sort of defines the way that I kind of see the world, because that's the fundamental problem I've had to face. And so a lot of my understanding of religion, philosophy, just basic structure of the human psyche, or in how we experience the world, is really seen through the lens that of the psychological problem I've had to face myself. And it's very, humbling. I've had to really, for the longest time, I didn't want to confront this. I just thought it was especially my teen years, I was like, man, this is just a phase I'm going to grow out of, and kept on looking for like the new lease on life, to where I do something, I change something up, and I'm a totally new person. And then it works for a little while, and all of a sudden, bam, it attacks you, and you're, the whole time you just repress it, and it comes back worse than it was before, And so, yeah, man, I've lived my life very differently from a lot of people. And my story that I want to tell, in a series that I'm working on right now, that I'll be releasing very soon, it's going to be an introduction into like my story, because of my story, when I tell people, I haven't really told a whole lot of people about my story, about some of the really darker elements. And I don't want to scare people off, but I feel like in order to really let them have insight into the struggles that I've been through, and hopefully it is able to give people the confidence to meet their own struggles, and to realize, man, this is a guy who went through this, and he made it out of this. And too often I think we just want to forget the problems that we've had. Too often they are the areas that we really experience a grace, when we really are able to receive, I think, a degree of healing and understanding within ourselves. And I feel like when we cultivate that grace with ourselves, it affects everyone that we meet. It affects our entire lives.
Well, Mesh, this in some of your describing and talking, some of the time you share in a way that this podcast is kind of an opportunity for you to use that which you have learned through your experiences, through your story, et cetera, as a way to kind of help other people who are also walking through some different things. And at the same time, some other things communicate as if this is a way to continue to grow and to learn and discover things in which you don't know. Mm-hmm. Is there one over the other, or is it kind of some of both?
It's definitely some of both. As I'm writing this, I began working on a lot of the stuff that I wanted to share. I've been working on it for years, because it's just, there's so many things that I want to get done. I didn't know what direction to go into. And so as I began writing material and ideas, especially with explaining my story, it's itself an exploration. It's a sort of psychotherapy, because I've really been able to put into words some of the complex experiences that I've had. And it's been very, when you remember some of the areas you've gone, man, it really, you're so grateful for you're like, wow, at some time I couldn't conceive of me ever getting out, of where I was, because there's no conception of a solution that, when you're gripped with a problem that unconsciously has a grip on you, that you don't know you don't know how to change. You don't do it just through willpower, because you realize the will is the very thing that is diseased, for lack of a better word. It's the thing that that has a problem. And so for me, understanding the human will, in what capacity we have it and how it can be developed, is its own topic that I really want to get into, because I think we actually discussed this recently about free will, and I think the misconceptions about it, and how it's actually a conversation that people don't really realize how much lack of control they have. Like there's I put it like this, when people talk about free will, you got to define what free means. You also got to define what will means, because in lots of ways, I think the New Testament kind of even depicts us in some ways unable to be free in our own power, our own ability. I think a lot of at least in my understanding, I have a little bit of a different take than a lot of people on some spiritual things. And that's the thing that kind of goes in counterpoint to my experience, is that being born in the South, being born where there was a place of cultural religion, and how growing up it was a positive influence, but then it got to a point where my humanity demanded something more. And I think too often the way that it's portrayed to us, we're portrayed a fifth grader's theology, and then when we turn 13, that's all that we have. We're like, we think it's exposed. Like, oh, this is bull crap. Well, it's the way you're taught it was bull crap, because it's not like you can understand the spiritual sophistication. The problem is, though, is that a lot of the necessary spiritual sophistication that we need to have with our problems with the human condition, it's not even talked about a whole lot in pulpits. It's not really addressed in a lot of circles, and people actually want to talk about it. Like in my experience, people that have a genuine thirst for spiritual understanding, a genuine desire to grow in grace and truth and whatever you want to call it, when you really get into some of these areas of vulnerability, and even some of these darker areas, there's an authenticity there. Because for me, it doesn't make any sense that if you really feel like that you have some degree of light inside you, you're not afraid of the dark. You're not insecure. You don't see something and it just totally blindsides you, and you can't control it. Too often I think in America, like there's such a rigid spirituality where it's still a product of the human ego. It's still a product of willpower. It's absent of the grace and the understanding and the ability to sufficiently navigate the human experience. And for me, being able to find some answers to my own problems, even if it's just enough of a relief that it's been in my life that I can share with others, it's worth it. Because even though I'm still working through areas, there was a problem. There was a place and time where if I didn't have the investment of love in my early life from my family, really had a infrastructure of purpose that I feel my identity had, and that was kind of placed in me, was kind of taught me and made aware within me. Without having that, I can conceive of myself being someone who would have either got on drugs or committed suicide. When you believe that there isn't hope for you, when you diminish your life to a point where you just believe that, okay, this is all that there is. And for me, spirituality and religion was kind of like the Hail Mary pass. I was like, okay, my life's over, and basically I'm going to try this, and some people have that weird religious experience where it's night and day, just and you're a different person. That was never me. I have some experiences that I want to get into, but I also want to approach them from kind of a secular view, because I feel like our understanding of spiritual things requires objectivity. And I feel like too often there's a little distrust that we have when people share spiritual things and share deeper things, because, man, the truth is not always so simple. And so when someone communicates to you deeper spiritual things, I feel like there's a healthy skepticism, because, if we believe everything that everyone tells us, I mean, we'd be really jacked up. I mean, especially when it comes to claims of some sort of ultimate truth. And so part of this podcast, I want to be able to, I have pieces of the puzzle. That's why, you know, part of my cover of you know, my profile picture and the cover of the podcast cover is you know, my face with puzzles and stuff, because I'm still piecing things together. But I have enough of an image. I have enough of an image to see something that I believe is really beautiful. And I don't hear this perspective coming from a lot of people. And I just feel so convicted to promote these ideas, regardless if you're religious or secular, regardless of where you come from, regardless of any of whoever you are. They're universal principles. And even when there's areas where I do flesh out more of my own independent belief, I want to have the flexibility of the seeker out there, the flexibility of someone who's able to take it. And I don't want you to come follow. I'm not your guru. I'm not your televangelist. I'm not your pastor or anything, man. I'm a person who has sought answers, and I found some of them. I have a lot more. I have a lot of areas that I'm still working on, and I'll be very upfront about that. And I'll be hopefully self-aware enough to come to the podcast in humility as I'm giving a degree of certainty that I think I found in myself.
That was a good explanation there at the end there. How long has this been something you've been kind of twirling around with the thought of taking these things that you've experienced and been working through and thinking through and all this and pulling this into a podcast particularly? How long has that been something you've been thinking about?
If I had to say, I would probably say 2 years. You know, it's weird. It's kind of it itself is kind of, I'm a fan of podcasts, and I've always kind of thought of like, man, maybe I could do this, you know? So I would probably say when my brother introduced me to S-Town, that was done in such a cool way. And, you know, it was really an interesting story, and it was told so well. And it really made me realize that if you can take an interesting life and you can really tell it in a way that's very thoughtful, creative, purposeful, you know, it really is something that is a powerful medium. And it was weird when I listened to S-Town. It was one of those things where when I finished it, it was like I saw the world differently. I was like, wow, that was like, you know, even though it was very, very sad, and it was for some reason it hit me in a place that honestly, man, for the longest time, you know, when you deal with neurosis, there's a lot of locking up in areas of yourself. And the more that I find wholeness, the more I feel myself just able to embrace my humanity. And it's, as an artist, it's so fulfilling, because now I feel like I'm so capable of enjoying art on a profound level, because I trust that I can open myself up to reality, to things, and experience them richly, because I don't have to protect myself. You know, I don't have to worry about, you know, I feel like that was one area of my life where, you know, when you feel certain areas of malnourished, and even maybe you could even call it unconscious oppression of some sort, you know, you get into this bunker mentality to where you're shielded off. And I'm still working through a lot of that, but like, I know that mentality is itself, it feeds the thing you fear. And the more that you learn and are able to experience trust in the nature of reality, and cultivate what I like to call, you know, just genuine spiritual experience, something that, you know, deeply. It's almost like, you know, as we experience life, we actually life experience is actually experiencing ourself experiencing life. You know, we are the experiencer. And so all the things that we hold in ourselves, all the things that we believe, all the things that we experience, you know, but integrate into narratives and stuff, that itself affects how we experience things. It's almost like, imagine if you had something really on your mind, you're very concerned about something, and someone takes you to the movies, And let's just say it's something so important that it's in the back of your head. You're like, it's like, let's say you have to leave early. So you're constantly kind of like trying to enjoy the movie, but you just can't deeply. Well, I think too often we are trying to enjoy our life. We're trying to enjoy what this reality is. There's things that are filtering that experience, that are blocking things off. And there's so many different narratives and beliefs that we have to confront to really make potent our experience. So no, but when I experienced S-Town, for me, it was like, I just felt it was such a powerful perspective of life that was kind of portrayed. And I let it affect me in a certain way. I let it kind of awaken that part of how the story was told. That drove me to really listen to other podcasts and begin to kind of experience the medium in a way that for me was very new and enjoyable. And I feel like it's still a relatively new medium. And I don't really feel like there's even been a sufficient use of storytelling with music and with, multiple different things. So I really would like to, part of this podcast is that, I want to help people experience themselves fundamentally. And the only way that I can do that is show you how I've experienced myself, the good and the bad, and how I've been able to formulate a perspective that really that just keeps getting more and more rich in life. And for the first time, I've really felt I more and more feel myself, and that's a very powerful thing. I feel like disassociated from the chaos of the modern world. Sometimes I'm so grateful that I'm like, wow, this is my life. This is amazing, and it's I've come a long way,
Obviously the podcast space, speaking of like S-Town and these other, podcasts, it's a crowded space. What is it about, you think, what you're doing and what you're hoping to accomplish with your podcast that you'd say sets what you're doing apart and makes it a bit less where it kind of just gets lost into the rest of everything else? Or are you just like, I'm not really trying to set myself apart, just doing what I'm doing? Like, what is it that's different or unique or about what you're trying to go for?
There's a place that I go when I think about that question, and it's a place where sometimes it's the ego that wants to approach it this way, but sometimes it's actually the knowing that I have something to offer. And it's this, that, I feel like too often we think entertainment is escapism. For me, entertainment's never been, I've never seen it as escapism. I've seen it as what is making this so appealing to the human soul, to the human experience. Why are we drawn to this? And why is the power of narrative and understanding so powerful to our nourishment just as people? And so for me, it comes down to one word, and that's multidimensionality. That's kind of big, my favorite word. Yeah, it's and me and David's interactions on in text and stuff. That's like my number one word, dimensionality, because I feel like the ways that we experience the world they're so multifaceted, and sometimes we're trying to communicate in one mode, and yet we all know that there are just so many different ways of seeing things. It's hard to be aware of different modes at different times. And so for me, the concept of multidimensionality, or just dimensionality, there's different things. It's a way of kind of just making us aware that what this one area of knowing or knowledge is part of a holistic picture, And so to try to offer that in the podcast medium, in regards to the human experience, it's kind of like I said, there's a little bit of ego, because it's so ambitious of an idea to communicate the life experience.
Yeah. I mean, what you're after is a pretty daunting task.
Yeah, man. Well,
embrace and engage and tackle this question of the human experience and the human condition.
mhm.
That's a pretty daunting
Well,
fight to snap into.
absolutely. But you know what? It's the thing every day. Like I have kind of a regiment that, I wake up, I eat breakfast, get you some coffee. Um, and man, like when I write every day, it's almost like I just don't write to say something. As I'm writing, I'm exploring something. I'm like saying, okay, let's go into an area here that there's not so much certainty. But let's try to put one foot in front of the other to where I have certainty in one thing, but it's like a torch. And I'm walking down a cave, but I can see right in front of me something, And then it's like after I see that, when I go up a little more past that, well, what else do I see there? And so you can't do it so fast. The way I write is kind of slow, but at the same time, it's very intentional, And so for me, it's going into these areas that are very very hard to communicate. There are things of life that in the process of writing, I'm exploring myself, and I'm essentially doing this in my own life. And this is merely just a medium that I'm able to release a lot of the things that I'm receiving in my own writing. I mean, essentially, it's hard to even take credit for some of it because all I'm doing is making myself conscious of certain things, and the more I'm conscious of something, and I focus on it long enough, and I kind of receive the spiritual nutrients of it, I then can take that and move on to something else while retaining some of that truth and understanding. And it's very experimental. I've been doing this probably for the last I've been in measure, I think I've done all throughout my life, but consciously, when the pandemic happened, man, I had to explore myself more. I had to find this core of joy in myself and really kind of cultivate it, because that was the only way that I could kind of stand what was happening in the world. And in my own life, it was something that was long overdue. But I've been really going over a lot of my past writings and ideas. And there's things sometimes that I find that it's like, I wrote this. Like it's amazing when you're able to explore yourself and get into a certain frequency of thought, and you are exploring some of these areas, and you go back and you're looking, and you're like, wow, like this is really, it's hard to believe I actually came up with this. And so it's really fun. As I'm exploring myself and a lot of these ideas and a lot of these areas of my life, I realize that there is the assumption of a certain area, and I'm adopting that assumption, and I think it's who I am. I think it's part of who I, it's an unconscious belief or limited belief in who I am. And I realize that, it's part of that whole problem of what's normal. And too often what is abnormal sometimes is what we adopt, and we associate with that abnormal way of being and thinking. And being conscious of this, you realize, wait, I've been played. When I do my creative process of writing, a lot of these areas come up, and when I am able to consciously confront them, there's also the ability to disassociate and to realize that there's a greater truth and context narrative, that when I'm able to really see it from the outside and really understand it, I don't just assume it. I just don't adopt that any longer, because I realize that it's not me. It's actually this unconscious thing draining myself from myself. And so that I'm able to, with that light, that torch I have, I see that. And when you do this daily, you begin to have more. It's like a muscle you develop. You develop this ability to suspend yourself from yourself. And in the time that we live in, that we're so reactionary and being taught to be reactionary, and I feel like what I have to say in this practice that I have and that I've cultivated, it's a way of bringing to a lot of our issues, I think, a disassociation that allows us to get into the details and the real things that are often behind our problems. You know, a lot of times we think that our problems are what's right in front of us, or there's a certain issue. Too often there's something behind that issue that's actually the problem, even if it's just our own inability to see correctly.
Earlier, you were talking about some things. You mentioned,
Mhm.
or you kind of started talking a little bit about kind of an upcoming idea that you had
Yeah.
regarding kind of a three-part series you said you were going to be doing.
Mhm.
You want to talk a little more about that, called Defect?
Yes. When I began to experience obsessive compulsive tendencies and stuff, being able to acknowledge that something was wrong and something needed to be addressed was something that was very I mean, it took me years. I didn't know that there was something called obsessive compulsive disorder. I didn't know there was something that uh I didn't, there was no understanding of, of how you navigate how you feel inside yourself. And so for me, I just felt like this creeping area of uncertainty, this feeling of a flaw, defect. And as I've engaged a lot of people that have also had experiences, with certain mental health issues and disorders and stuff, the word really stuck to a lot of people. It was a very potent word. And I feel like not only is it a word that appeals to people that have had issues, I think it really addresses, I think, the underlying feeling that we all have as human beings, because we feel an imperfection. The way that we're able to confront that really makes a huge difference in our lives. Like I said before, in our society, we're not really taught how to navigate these things. And so we too often are carrying around a sense of defect, and it compromises the fullness that I believe, we're meant to have in our lives. It causes us to not confront these other areas within us to make us a fully alive person. And in my experience, confronting the sense of defect was actually the fundamental way that I exercise my potential and my ability to receive insight and whatever degree of enlightenment that I have. I know it sounds very arrogant to say that I'm enlightened, but it's kind of like, man, when you go from being, when you go from having such a struggle within yourself, when you begin to have a certain degree of freedom, it is, I have no problem saying that there's a degree of enlightenment there. It's a very humbling thing. But like I said before, I'm still navigating things. There's so much that I have to know. But when you feel like part of yourself aligns with yourself, when you feel a part of yourself, when you feel like you personify the answers that you're asked, of the questions that you're asking, I feel like it's incumbent upon me to share what I feel has affected my life.
So with this, what if you could kind of take this goal you're after with podcasting, sharing your story, talking about your life,
Mhm.
kind of bringing all of this under kind of one umbrella of this podcast, and somehow hope to give some type of succinct, singular way you could kind of sum all this into a goal,
Mhm.
kind of one big thing you'd hope to accomplish
Mhm.
in 30 seconds or less, 20 seconds or less. What would you say you want to ultimately accomplish with this in kind of the shortest way possible?
The exploration and potential of human joy that we cultivate in confronting our problem areas, our trauma, our senses of defect.
Mm.
And I feel like in my own life, that's it's kind of like the limit to that is, we don't know. I just know I'm excited to begin the process, but that's how I would say it. It's an exploration, an experimentation in the limits of human joy that is exercised in confronting our problems.
So you want to use it as a space to explore,
Mm-hmm.
kind of to be creative, exploring all of that kind of
Absolutely.
in all these things, and doing that kind of with other people along the way, and having them on and talking through things, hearing stories, that kind of thing. That's kind of the ultimate nugget of what this is about, is exploring this creative space and what you can do with to understand some of these things you're
Yes.
pulling at.
Yeah. And I would say this, I would say that there's two kind of fundamental dimensions. There's storytelling. There's kind of going into my inner life. Okay. And then when I tell my stories, I also want to have people on that make a demand of us engaging, where I can actually, I can bring out some of these things out in the open and discuss with people, share ideas, share experience, and just have a natural engagement of our inner lives that, that I feel like, too often I feel like in the self-help world, it can get boring, man, and get like a little too abstract, which abstraction can be interesting. It's like this. If I can explain to you like the perfect explanation of what falling in love is, okay, that still leaves the process of the actual event of falling in love. Okay. And so what I want to do is somehow be able to have a place where these ideas and concepts aren't just ideas and concepts, but I'm able to get it as close as I possibly can to actual experience, and so
during the podcast.
Yeah. In my storytelling and my conversations, where we approach some of these things that are so, it leaves someone wanting to experience life in a richer way, and actually having experienced life in a richer way, where it's not just principles, but there's an exploration in their own potential, because it's an exploration in my potential, and so, and in my guest potential, there's a deep dive that we go into some of these areas, and it allows them to have a consciousness and an awareness that they then can take in their lives. And it's exciting information. It's not just, how to do this. So how to, whatever. I feel like it's a way of, if what I would kind of compare it to is Carl Jung's Red Book, how there is this abstract way we can explore ourselves. A lot of people don't know Carl Jung's Red Book, but just in short, Carl Jung, a lot of his ideas are he's considered, it's considered kind of a mystic in lots of ways. And I feel like in his own life and a lot of his own psychology, he identified that in the West, especially, there was a lack of myth in our spirituality, in our religion. And so essentially he sought to kind of rekindle the lost myths, the lost, I would say the lost multidimensionality of what this life is. And so in the Red Book, he essentially allowed a lot of unconscious, imaginations to, to put it on paper, wrote about, just allowed himself to go to some really difficult areas that he would see images, he would see weird things, and he wrote about them, and he explored them, he tested them. And so even though I'm not going to be probably as bizarre as what the Red Book is, it's kind of like my own Red Book in a sense, that it's a way of, it's a way of us engaging ourselves multidimensionally in a way that too often we're very one-dimensional with self-help, or how it's so just like, how to be a better blah blah, how to do this. It's like, and instead of just being one dimension, I want us to test the capacity for us to have a multi-dimensional experience of our own selves, of our own life, and really get in tune with so many different things at once, that really defines what it means to have joy, to have deeper purpose, to rekindle your own sense of myth. And I feel like that we've lost it. And there's only a few writers that I've even really heard that I think that really kind of get this. I mean, there's more than that. There's communities of people that obviously kind of get it, but from the perspective that I want to tell it, I haven't heard it before. And I really feel like this kind of controversial area of kind kind of mythical spirituality mixed with kind of the orthodox, mixed with philosophy and science and all these other areas. I want to bring it all into a place where we all can kind of experience our own red book, our ability to embrace our own unconscious. And I think that brings us to territory, mythical territory. It brings us to a lot of different things. And so in order to really accomplish my ambition for this podcast, it necessarily lends itself to the mythical. It's part of how we have inherited the human experience. You know, it's why we go and see movies and read books. Stories speak to the multidimensionality of our human soul. But the question is, what is our story? What's your story? What's my story? And what does that mean? And no one else can define that but you. You know, no one else can really ask the hard questions and deep dive in yourself. And a lot of times that's the problems of our lives, is that when we don't ask the right questions, or if we're deceiving ourselves and giving the wrong answers. But ultimately, there is a degree of story, of narrative of our own lives that is so rich in meaning and purpose that I want to share what that means to me, and then hear other people share what that means to them, and ultimately bring us to a deeper understanding and a deeper exploration. There's a certain uncertainty in our knowledge of these deep areas, but we can put one foot in front of the other and get to places that we never even dreamed existed. That's the story of my life. That's the story of how I've been able to overcome a lot of OCDs, putting one foot in front of the other, one piece of perception at a time, giving me, like, you know, what I call Shawshanking my way to freedom. You just get like one little insight, and then you're digging at the wall, you know, and years go by, you're developing more and more insight. Before you know it, a breakthrough happens, you know. And I feel like there is so much we have to learn, and that there's no shortcut to this. But that's actually the good news, because you want it to be rich with intent. And I feel like being able to represent how I've accomplished what I've accomplished, not that I can take credit for it, but obviously I've took steps, I took some risk, and there's such a difficulty in navigating our inward life that I kind of want to take the risk of sharing some of the deeper things that's led me to a way of insight and a degree of freedom. And that but every day I have to choose it. Every day I have to choose the deeper insight and define my life and define my problems through the eyes of my perception, and not through the eyes of any identity that would try to be given me, that I just assumed was me when it wasn't me. And so, you know, joy in our own lives is tied to our narrative. It's tied to how you're designed, how you're built to hold deep meaning. My deepest ambition for this podcast would be that everyone will learn how to tap into that for themselves.
Yeah, it sounds like so much of what you conclude and what you're saying is that you have gone from a place of feeling trapped, overwhelmed, stigmatized, like a defect, you know, those kind of things. And through this journey that you've been on, you've explored some things that have reshaped how you see yourself, and as a result, the world around you. And from that has kind of grown this desire to then take that and share that with others through this podcast, by way of telling your story, sharing your craft and music and these things, inviting other people to be a part of this journey, and kind of hoping to simultaneously, you know, have others be able to see and experience some of the freedom that you've experienced. Is that kind of what you're after, what you're sharing?
Yeah, absolutely, man. Most of all, regarding this stuff, there's an authenticity that has to be there, because I feel like that I want people to be able to hear my story and how I look at myself, how I look at my own story, how I'm able to look at the negative things, and how it's not just naive hope. It's not just platitudes. It's not things that sound good. There's this deeper dimension to how we change that, change into the person that is unchangeable, if that makes any sense. I think there's underneath us, man, at the bottom of us is really who we really are, who we've always been, who we will always be. You know, it's there's this genuine person that experiences consciousness, that experiences reality, that there's just so much stuff that we have over that. And I think our paradigm of changing and improving is to me, if you're trying to improve based on a broken version of yourself, in some ways you're kind of making permanent your brokenness. And so most, you know, like in order to really be the person you are, who's fully alive and on all these different areas of your life, it requires such a level of engagement that is far deeper than I think a lot of people have been led to believe exists. There's a path to experiencing these things that I've never heard, but I realize the more that I share it with people, people really enjoy hearing about it, man. And it's very humble. It's been a humbling thing. And it's actually more normal for me to talk about this stuff than about anything else. Like I'm just having, when you live a life where at any moment you can feel taken away or drawn away by a neurotic instinct or problem, it's almost like you walk around packing. You know, you walk around with weapons. At any moment you can have these tools and these weapons, you know, to like counter the opposition and the things that come up, and at the same time have enough cultivated and kind of habitual way that you live, that it's how you see things, it's how you identify with people, it's how you feel the world around you. And so you know, as much as I kind of have a end goal, simultaneously there is this openness to explore that I think is equally as important, because as much as I have things to say, I have these areas that I want them to be more of catalysts to knowledge rather than knowledge itself. You know, I think a lot of times answers often give us more questions, and that's a beautiful thing. You know, it's you know, a kid's little and asks its parents about why is the sky blue? It's like, well, you know, the kids at some point not going to understand what you're talking about. You know, you're going to get into scientific reasons and whatever. And at some point, you know, you come to a place where there's a certain unconditionality to the way things exist. And yet the whole idea of that, it's like the kid's like, well, why? You know, it's like, well, because it just is. And at some point things just are. At some point there's an acceptance of the way that things are. But I think too often it's our perceptions laced with confusion, with things that aren't, and being able to find what that means to us as individuals. Like, how do we define who we are, and how can we clarify and live our lives in a truth that isn't stifling, nor does it take away from other people, but it just gives you that stability to just enjoy other people, enjoy life, as well as share what you believe is true and helpful to other people, you know?
So how often are you going to be doing this as far as, you know, having podcasts that you're going to be producing?
Yeah.
Is this going to be like a weekly, monthly? How often are you going to be doing this?
So yeah, I'm hoping it's a weekly thing. I've already done several interviews with people, and I've already got it rolling as far as material goes. I may even break them up into part 1 and part 2. You know, I do feel like it's a little more work than I thought it was going to be, but I believe I want to have like you know, maybe like 10 interviews per season. Might take a break. And in the midst of that, you know, I'll be working and working towards releasing the series. So yeah, I'm gonna look for it to be a weekly podcast. And yeah, man, throughout the summer, I'll probably have weekly conversations and be releasing the series Defect.
Any teasers on week 1?
Ooh, I think week one, I will give a brief introduction. It's going to be very, very short. But my first guest is going to be Dan Hurd, a mutual friend of us, actually. Dan is yeah. So I think I'm going to use him for the first guest. And Dan has a nonprofit, One Pedal at a Time. He's got a fascinating story. And I think you've been on his podcast, haven't you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, man. So that's man, really great episode with him. He gets into his story, into he actually, attempted suicide several times, and really was having a rough time. He's a veteran, and he goes into his story, and it's a great example of finding purpose within your struggle, within your weakness. And he's a beautiful person. He's just a really beautiful person. It's funny, man, watching some of his videos, hearing him talk. He loves on people that often get overlooked. And it's very humbling, actually. Like, man, it really is an example of someone being effective in whatever way they feel like they can. And that's kind of a really inspiring way, because we're all around people that only we can kind of reach. They're in our sphere of influence. And it's weird. Too often, if we're too lofty and not thinking that the little things don't matter and then the big things of life matter, often the big things consist of the sum total of the little things, and when it comes to loving the people in your life, even if you have ideas and ambitions of of helping people with your life, it starts with the people that are right in front of you. And I don't know of a person who's more inspiring of that than Dan, but yeah, man, I'm looking forward to releasing that. I'm editing that one right now, actually. So
What is something that you would say most people don't know about you, or maybe even something people assume about you that isn't true, or something people don't know about you that you wish did know about you?
Yeah, one of my first jobs, a guy, he was playful about it. He called me surfer dude. It's like, hey, surfer dude, because just the way I talk, I guess, And then when I started working at Walmart, I worked at Walmart for 6.5 years, and the guy used to call me Harry Pothead, and it didn't really bother me that much. It was funny, but the fact is that, man, I've never been someone who's really into drugs. That's never been really me, and it's one of those things where when people hear me talk, they just assume that I'm just this strung out guy who's, like, dude, the universe. And it's kind of like, man, dude, I'm just trying to articulate, and man, I'm kind of a happy guy. It's weird. There's a little paradox to my personality. I'm a very happy person and uplifting, but I'm a very like weighty, heavy person. Like I think about things, and there's actually a lyric in one of my songs that it says the burden is lifting me instead of tearing me apart. And that's the way I approach problems and the deep things, is that for me, when I confront them, the burden, the heaviness isn't something that weighs me down. It's the thing that lifts me up. That's kind of the difference. And it's weird, though, when I get into it with some people, actually, I would say it's human, because it's when you talk about these things, it's from a place where of my alignment. It just comes out and it's my thing. Well, when someone else has their own alignment, it's different. And so too often when you're sharing something so deep, they have to process it, and it takes effort to sort of order it. For me, it's like, I can talk this for hours. I do, we've talked for hours, but it's weird, man. It's that if I had to say there was one thing that really kind of gets under my skin, is the assumption that, like, a lot of my ideas, a lot of my perspective is based on, heavy drug use or something. And it's like, man, there's, I'm just being honest. It's it's because I've been able to experience these areas that I think people don't really experience unless it's like a synthetic experience, or for lack of a better word, unless it's it's an idea or a way they access their brain through chemical means, which, I've taken medications and stuff, but, in my life, there's been, very minimal experimentation with anything outside, that, and it's, man, I really value sobriety. To me, sobriety has it, the way that life is and the way that I've accessed it is its own high, because I've learned that there's these areas that you can have access to, and you can integrate them into a unity where you just feel grounded, and you feel able to access reality in a way that's just uniquely yours. And I think that's the way it's supposed to be, man. I feel like I'm not like a hippie. Like I have kind of like I don't know. It's weird. I'm such this multifaceted person. It's hard to make assumptions about one area, and that's kind of like it's a little bit of a nuisance. Is that I want people to take serious my ideas, my perspective, and not just diminish it by saying, "Oh man, he's just I think
it's great.
Yeah, man.
There's a lot more to you is what you want to communicate.
Yeah.
Than what can meet the eye. You're not Harry Pothead or Surfer Dude. There's definitely, even though you can come across and be light and jovial and those kind of things, that this is a space that you can kind of, I guess, show more of that. And that you definitely do that through your music, show kind of those other layers of yourself that definitely wrestle with a lot of other ideas and thoughts. And clearly listening to you talk about this, there's quite a bit that you have churning upstairs that you want to get into some. And I think this is definitely gives quite an opening of spectrum of possibility of where things can land on this podcast. And I'm pretty stoked for you, man.
Yeah, well, thank you, man. I appreciate that, man. I'm gonna say this too, is that often when you feel judged, you feel pigeonholed in a certain way, and you don't like how people make assumptions of you, you realize how much you realize how, because you don't like that, how you shouldn't do that to other people. And so it's allowed me to also say, I'm not going to just assume the worst of people, because I know what it's like to be seen a certain way. And then when around people or whatever, and then when in private, there's a deeper part of me, or even in a different setting. And so when people do something, I try not to react as much and judge too much, because I know the spectrum of human behavior is just so wide, and we all have different dimensionality to who we are. And it's even though I don't like people judging me based on one dimension. And so, I'm not going to pigeonhole other people based on one dimension or whatever, So it's a very common theme in my life. It's like the unlearning of my projection, the unlearning of my negative relationship to myself that I then bring in my negative, judgments to people, and it's
and I'll say from personal experience with you, Josh, you and I have shed a lot of text and communication and talking back and forth, and quite a few things that we've had pretty strong differences in terms of where we've stood. And I'll affirm that. You are someone who is, I think, very good at being able to embrace and hear things that are different from what you think and believe, without changing how you see the person who's sharing those differences. And I think that is a pretty commendable thing, because I think we've shared a good bit of differences in our challenges to each other. And I think it's you have displayed that, and I think that's a really commendable thing.
Man. And it's been very enjoyable too, because there's iron sharpens iron. And when you have trust with someone that, and it comes down to the fundamentals, you can trust that your conversation can be challenging, And there's areas where, where it's almost like you're exercising your ability to explore territory, explore areas within your differences, and know, okay, when do things go differently? We both agree this, and then we end up here. It's kind of like, okay, so how did you take the path here? How did I take the path there? And it's understanding that you actually can honor the way someone feels and say, you know what, I can get that, and it's too often we have our own inclinations, the way that our own, what do you call it? Like our own personality, kind of our own temperament. And a lot of times there's things that there's good reasons why we're different. And those differences often are, they're the things that kind of have challenged me a lot of times in our conversations to put into words exactly why I think and feel a certain way. And unless I had that, if I was just in an echo chamber, I wouldn't do that, but when there's someone who you can trust, that is, that you're able to kind of do that with, it makes a demand on yourself, and it's a healthy thing. Our differences are something that we can make a demand on the people that we are, the way that we see things. And I feel like it works the best with people that you can trust, that you see things differently, and you can take some risk in the conversation. And then whatever you learn from that person, whenever you come across another person that disagrees with you, you've already kind of you already have kind of a toolkit, of
practice.
Yeah, of ways you approach things. That if you go too hard right here, it's going to trigger all of this stuff that they're going to shut down. But if you can affirm and say, you know what, you probably see it like this, and then it's like, yeah, and then when you have that sort of connection, it then says, well, but how do you feel about this? And I was having a conversation with my brother recently. I was just saying how, man, people really seek to be affirmed in how they feel, and there's almost no such thing as a wrong feeling. It's everyone experiences the world a certain way for a certain reason. And even though there may be a way that you feel that may have some degree of false beliefs or whatever, it's still, to that person, it's how they feel, and it deserves to be honored. Because the only way that you can move beyond that or transcend that in a conversation, you have to honor it, and you have to kind of understand it in some degree. And that's only when you're able to have a constructive conversation. Because without that, there's just you're lacking self-awareness. You're lacking awareness of what they're bringing to the table. What's the fundamental obstacle that's keeping them from understanding you? And even, you can flip that, man. It's kind of, what's the obstacle in yourself that may even be bringing that misunderstanding? We all want order in our lives. We all, the testing of ourselves is something that is uncomfortable. And you have to do it enough to be secure in it and say, you know what, I don't have my identity in this debate. I don't have my identity in my politics or my theology. There's a certain deeper sense of being that allows you to handle the weight and be able to be exercised, but it doesn't change you fundamentally. Too often I think way that we change over a period of time, and there's no shortcut in it. We too often want the shortcut, and we want, okay, you're wrong, and you think that just jamming it down their throat's gonna change them. I mean, you have to go the road less traveled. So, that's the thing that's gonna drive their heels into the ground. You have to accept them. They have to kind of feel what's beyond your beliefs. What's the person there? And they connect with that. That authenticity breathes kind of the freedom to have real conversation. And, it's definitely what we have, man. It's a beautiful thing. And I really value you as a person. I mean, you're one of the best people that I know, man. You're just a solid human being, authentic. And man, it's man, it's a pleasure to have someone to really trust and engage with, and have someone who's also thirsty for answers, and to to really look at the world in a way that I think is enriching. It's not just a life sucking thing. You know, we both, I think, value the joy of life, and we want to counter the sources of strife that I think steal that. And it's very complicated in today's world. There's so many things out there that do that. But when it comes down to it, I think we all want to love better, and we want to experience love in a more profound way. And we want to be more enlightened and aware, of ourselves, and consequently of everything else, and it's, yeah, man. So
I love it, bro.
mm-hmm.
I love it.